tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
I believe we have Ross McKitrick back on the line now. Ross, good to talk to you here. What does it feel is really the misdirection taking place here, where the government is saying, on one hand, that this is not a heavy-handed regulatory process on its part?
Well, the comment that I made in my op-ed was that it's one thing for Trudeau to say, we believe in the economic principles of efficient climate policy, but his actual policies are anything but. He's got this elegant little carbon tax going, but the real costs of his policy are all the other regulations, the clean fuel standard, the EV mandate, the building energy efficiency codes. All these other regulations massively increase the costs of his climate policy. So the carbon tax itself, it's costly, there's no question about it, but there's actually much worse stuff in his policy mix, and he was talking as if none of that is there. Now, on the Conservative side, it's legitimate for them to point people to the high cost of the climate policy, but what they need to do is say, well, explain how can they be committed to things like the Paris Treaty and the net zero goals without actually planning to incur any costs of meeting them. That doesn't square up. So what I'd like is for some politician somewhere to be honest with the public and either say, we're going to do this and it's going to cost a fortune, so just get used to it, or say, okay, we've heard from the public that there's an upper limit to what they're willing to pay. This is the most we can hope to accomplish, and we'll stick with that.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point on all fronts, because it's easy to target, and certainly for political reasons, I understand why you target the consumer carbon tax, that retail carbon tax that you see, that's a line item on your gas bill, that you see buried in the price of fuel, for example. But even, I mean, if we look at what the Alberta government did under Jason Kenney, where they said, let's go after the industrial side of things, that makes a very much more convoluted and, as you're saying, they're complex process. And they're still doing, in effect, one of the same things, but it's a lot more opaque how it's happening.
Sure, yeah. When they don't like taking heat from consumers and they say, well, we'll make industry pay, I think by now everybody realizes that's just a shell game. It all ends up for the consumer one way or the other. Mm-hmm. It's either buried in the price that you pay at the pump in the case of gas, or you pay it directly out of your own pocket. But there's, as economics textbooks always say, costs can be shifted around, but they can't be avoided.
So what is I mean, just from an economics perspective here, let's just say that we agree with the core premise and we agree with the core goal, which is debatable, on how much we need to reduce emissions by. What is, from your perspective, the path that a government should take to do that, if that is its stated objective here?
Well, if it wants to meet the Paris target and then go from there down to some kind of net zero target later in the century, we would, to get to Paris, I would estimate we'd need maybe a $200 a ton carbon tax. And then to get to net zero, something more like a $500 a ton carbon tax. I'm not sure even that would do it. And the current policy mix that we have, even the federal Liberal policy mix, I don't think it'll get us to the Paris target. And it certainly won't get us to net zero beyond that. But that's a conversation that no one's having. None of the political leaders are willing to talk to people about the costs of what they're proposing to do.
So, and that, I guess, gets at what I was hoping to touch on here, which is that this commitment itself is boxing us in effect. Like, there's no way to get to that without some sort of really aggressive plan that even the Conservatives, who, I mean, again, to be fair to critics of Pierre Poilievre, he has committed to this. He has committed to Paris. He has not talked about changing the core target.
Right. And so there's an incoherency there, because he's justified in saying to people, look, we hear you, the cost of fuel is too high, cost of living is too high, all these policies are driving up the cost of living in unacceptable ways. But there's no magic alternative if at the same time you're going to remain committed to hitting the Paris targets. So Um, if, for instance, they think that you can get rid of the carbon tax and there'll be a whole bunch of far cheaper ways of doing it, then they're wrong. That is not the case. And people have tried, including past conservative governments, and it just doesn't work.
One of the challenges, and a lot of the green energy activists I find are guilty of this, where they commit to policies and that are based on technologies that don't really exist yet or don't do what they say they're going to do. But I also feel that a lot of people that try to say market-based solutions are the solution are also doing the same thing, because you and even mentioned at the bottom of your piece there, yeah, maybe there's a technology that will come along that will change the math on this, but right now that hasn't happened.
Yeah, so, and that's exactly the point, that given the current technology that we have, we're fairly limited in what we can do. And we don't know, maybe a new technology will come along 5 years or 10 years from now. The key is if you can decouple emissions from combustion. Basically, if you can find a way to burn fossil fuels without releasing CO2. We've decoupled lots of other emissions from combustion. We've decoupled sulfur dioxide and carbon monoxide and lots of other types of emissions from combustion. But there's no technology that does that for CO2, at least not yet, as far as we know.
Now, how much of a because the government says it is looking at that as well, and they say that all of these solutions are going to be part of the overall plan. But how much have they actually committed to R&D on that, or is it really just left to industry to come up with it on its own?
I think that I think there is some funding for that kind of research, much more in other countries. I mean, Canada's not a big player in research in any case, but sure, people are thinking about it, working on it, but there's no easy answer for it. So because of that, it's right now it's kind of a lot of talk, but there's, as far as I know, there's people have been thinking about it for 50 years and there hasn't been any breakthrough on it. So it's not like put $1 billion up and someone's going to figure it out. Right now, all we have is carbon capture and storage, which is very limited in its applicability.
We lost your video there, but as it happens, we're coming to the end of our time anyway. So if it's going to happen, that's the best moment for it. Ross McKitrick from the University of Guelph, great piece in the Financial Post. Wanted a federal leader who will be honest about climate policy. Hopefully you'll get your wish there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. Good talking to you.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.